Everyone, we are back. We're going to be covering the next chapter that we have to cover, which is FDR in the Shadow of War in the American Pageant today. And I'm going to clean up a couple things that we didn't quite get to from the last chapter, from the Depression, but we're mostly going to focus on the setup into World War II and what was going on. Now, the first thing I want to cover and kind of clean up is Franklin Roosevelt and his politics, because as the New Deal gets going, what we start to see is how popular this really is. You know, unemployment's going down. You're helping the common person. These things are things that most people are going to support. And so FDR sees this as an opportunity to get more support for the Democratic Party. And this is going to be called the New Deal Coalition. He's going to build a coalition of different groups, sometimes even competing groups, to vote Democrat, and we'll see this play out. So some of the groups that, and this is not an extensive list, but some of the groups that he is going to get support of. First, you have Southern whites. That's the solid South, right? Pro-segregation. They've been voting Democrat from the beginning. They're still in here. But some of the groups that are going to get added, kind of Western farmers, Western planters, with a lot of the support for farming. We talked about the AA, the FSA. They're going to join the New Deal Coalition. So now you have some support out west. One of the major groups that joins this New Deal Coalition are African Americans. FDR is going to be wildly popular with people of color. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why today, or actually later this week when we talk about World War II as well. But, that's a group that is heavy in the South, in the Deep South especially, as well as after the Great Migration. A lot of big cities in the North will have a lot of people of color, and that's a pretty big group. What we actually see is a majority of African Americans vote for FDR in his reelection, and every single presidential election since, no matter who's run, a majority of people of color have voted for the Democratic candidate in the United States. All the way through 2016, it's gonna stay in 2020, and that's gonna happen. So that's a huge group to get involved here. Unions, workers, right? A Wagner Act, collective bargaining, the New Deal. FDR has shown himself to be very supportive of workers in unions, so they're going to join this. Immigrants are still going to be a part of this Democratic Party and kind of these newer ideals. So, if you combine this, you can kind of see the Democratic domination, if you will. You're going to have the South, you have the solid South, plus you have people of color voting Democrat. So that's going to even push the South even more solid. The West will still be competitive, but a lot of those Western farmers and planters will be voting Democrat. And in the North, the big cities are going to turn, really turn to the Democrats with immigrants, with workers. We'll see that happen. So we see this play out in presidential elections, starting with FDR's first election as president. The next 9 presidential elections, out of the next 9, 7 of them will go to the Democrat. We have FDR for four times he's elected. Harry Truman, his vice president who will take over, will get elected once. Then we have Dwight Eisenhower wins twice as a Republican. Dwight Eisenhower wasn't really a Republican. He wasn't really any political party. Both parties tried to get him to run for them. So, he wins kind of off the political radar. Then John F. Kennedy wins, and his vice president, Lyndon Johnson, who takes over, will also win re-election. So, this New Deal coalition is going to stick well through the 1960s and have that support. So, something to keep in mind. Now, let's also talk about some of the things that happened around the world after World War One. One thing that I did not talk about was Russia, and during World War One, the Russian Revolution will happen. Now, it's not something we're going to get into super detail about in U.S. history, especially now that the AP test is stopping after historical period 7. But essentially what happens is in World War One, Russia's monarchy is not providing for the people in this war. Russia's got a lot of people and they have a lot of soldiers, but they didn't really have the supplies to support that kind of army. So oftentimes the Russian army did not have enough food. You had soldiers starving to death. Oftentimes didn't have enough clothes and shoes and socks. I mean, if you're going to send off to war without shoes on, it's going to be a problem. You're not going to do so well. And probably the big thing and the big rallying cry was they didn't have enough weapons. They didn't have enough guns. So oftentimes they would send platoons off to war. They'd send the front lines. They'd have their guns. And if you're in the second or third line, you're going to go out to the battlefield without a gun. What are you going to do? You're getting shot at. You don't have a gun. You're pretty screwed. And the direction was when the guy in front of you dies, take his gun. And when you die, the next guy will take your gun. So this didn't bode well with people. People are starving in Russia. They don't have this kind of support. Their kids are dying without guns in the battlefield, while the monarchy's keeping this money and still spending large, right? Just like kind of in the French Revolution, we talked about and saw, this abuse by those in power of the masses. And so the Russian Revolution, led by Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks of the Bolshevik Revolution, and it'll be successful. Russia's going to pull out of World War I, and we'll actually see them turn to communism. So this actually creates a big fear in the United States after World War I called the First Red Scare. And, the First Red Scare through the 20s and 30s is this fear that, hey, if that happened in Russia, could that happen here? We've talked about this fear of anarchists, of communists, especially throughout the 20th century, but well before that, fear of immigrants, right? And now we have a big influx of immigrants from Eastern Europe. And hey, these are the anarchists. These are the communists. Now we see a major country in the world turn to communism. Could it happen in the United States? People are afraid, and that's a big thing. So this kind of gets tied in with nativism, which leads into World War II, of this fear of foreigners. We've talked about the groups of Italians and Irish immigrants, coming in, as well as other Eastern European immigrants. But one big example of this that kind of shows what happened is Sacco and Vanzetti case. Sacco and Vanzetti were two Italian immigrants. One was a shoe peddler, made shoes. One was a fish peddler, sold fish. And they were arrested of a crime of robbery and murder of kind of a payment of a factory, that he was handing out the checks that he got robbed and he got shot and killed. And now look, Sacco and Vanzetti were anarchists. They were self-proclaimed anarchists. They attended rallies. They had guns. These weren't two people that were completely oblivious to what was happening and what their beliefs were. But that's why they were arrested. They were arrested because they were anarchists. And, when the police questioned them about it, they said, no, we're not, right? You're not going to tell the police you're an anarchist. They're going to throw you in jail anyway. They knew that they were, and they did. The fact of the matter is that they probably didn't do it. At least one of them didn't do it. So, when we look at, for example, witnesses, there were witnesses that bought fish. It was on Christmas Eve, which is a big Italian holiday, right? Christmas, big Catholic holiday, and you eat eel as an Italian on Christmas Eve. And so they bought up, he had a line out the door buying eels from him as this murder happens. But Italians were not allowed to testify in court. So all those witnesses, not allowed to testify. And Sacco and Vanzetti were both sentenced to prison, both sentenced to death, and they were killed. And so around the world, there was kind of outrage in Europe, in Latin America, that, hey, this is America here. This racism against these guys. There's no evidence. There's no proof, and that's a big problem. So, that's we still have this fear of foreign-born people. We still have this fear of foreigners, and that's going to create some pieces in World War II that aren't so good when we look back on them. But let's get into the shadow of the war kind of coming through. So, as we look to during the Depression, and things are starting to ramp up a little bit. The London Economic Conference takes place in London, and basically what a lot of European countries wanted to do was get the leaders of the world together to talk about what to do about the economic situation. If you remember, we talked about the Dawes Plan before of the money that was kind of transferring from Germany, who's borrowing money from the United States to pay back Britain and France, who were paying back money to the United States. And so there were a lot of economic issues here. And FDR goes to this London Economic Conference, plans on going, but finds out that a big key piece of this was for everyone to kind of keep the dollar, keep their currency stable, to not have inflation happen. Right, which is the exact opposite of what FDR is doing, right? We're creating jobs, we're spending a ton of money, it's going to create inflation. He's not too worried about it. FDR actually comes out against the London Economic Conference. He says, I'm not attending, I'm not following what you say. America's going to continue on with this New Deal. So, that is him really going toward that isolationist viewpoint, right? Kind of the opposite of going into World War One, where Americans were really fervent on getting involved, and Woodrow Wilson was kind of holding off. This is going to be kind of the opposite. FDR, and Americans are going to be more isolationist, and we'll see Franklin Roosevelt make that change here and want to get involved, but the people of the United States want to stay out. They saw what happened in World War One. We have to stay out. And that's kind of the idea. So how does this kind of come to fruition? Legislatively, we're going to pass a number of neutrality acts. And you don't have to know the specifics of each one, but you do have to know that we pass these acts to basically say, hey, if we declare an enemy combatant in some form or fashion, then we're gonna kind of stay out of it. But you American citizens, you got to watch what you do. You can't go on ships. You can't do this. What we're seeing is Germany and Adolf Hitler rise to power. We're seeing Mussolini and Italy rise to power, and we see we're not going to be on that side. Like this is not the group that we are going to be siding with. We're friendly with Britain. We're friendly with France. These are our close allies. The other guys are not, and we want to stay neutral. But at the same time, we don't want to support those sides. So, if there's a problem, if we say this is a bad group of people, let's not economically help them. Let's not, U.S. citizens can't even economically, ship things to them and board their ships. Like we're staying neutral, but we don't really get involved with them. So we kind of develop this good neighbor policy, and the good neighbor policy is that we are going to be good neighbors even when problems occur. So with these foreign countries, hey, we're not going to just jump to war, jump to fighting. Let's get those fists up and start, knocking people down. And this kind of becomes tested in Mexico. If you remember from before World War One, Pancho Villa, we haven't had the best relationship with Mexico, and we're actually going to see some Mexican rebels take some oil fields from U.S. business, and those U.S. businesses want war. They want us to go fight Mexico, and the good neighbor policy says, nah, we're not going to do it. So we actually diplomatically work this out. It works, and this seems good. We can stay out of the European war stuff and just kind of be nice to everybody. But we're going to get the big test of that in Spain. So Spain's going to go through a Spanish Civil War. Basically, this Spanish Civil War is going to decide which side of the war they're going to be on. Now, ultimately, you're going to end up neutral. But what's going to happen is we're going to see Francisco Franco try to lead a revolution against the loyalist Spanish government. And in the U.S., obviously, we support kind of the old regime here, whereas the Hitler and Mussolini, Italy, Germany are going to support Franco and try to get him as kind of a fascist leader to take over Spain. We actually have a short brigade called the Abraham Lincoln Brigade of soldiers from the U.S. actually fight for Spain over there, kind of unofficially volunteer to help them out and fight for them. So it's not through the U.S. government, but kind of this group of people that go fight for them. And this kind of puts us to the test. Like, what do we do? Ultimately, we have kind of a war going on. We want to support one side, but we're trying this good neighbor policy out. And how's that going to work? We're not really neutral anymore. Those neutrality acts, it doesn't really work. So we don't remain neutral. We end up helping economically the loyalist side, and it kind of kills the neutrality acts where they stand, right? Because we didn't really stay neutral, we kind of lied about it, and that's what we're looking at moving forward. So it kind of kills the idea that you can legislate neutrality, that the Congress can pass acts and say, hey, we're neutral, this is what we're going to do. When things change in wartime situations so quickly, you don't know what you're going to have to do, and ultimately, we know what the end result of this is going to be. So we're trying to stay isolationist. We're trying to stay kind of out of these affairs and stay neutral, but we're really not neutral. That's kind of what the takeaway here. We're really supporting one side, as we'll see. So there becomes, with this idea of staying out of it, this appeasement of Japan and Germany. And this happens from the U.S. perspective. This happens in France. This happens in Britain, right? And no one really wants to go back to war. World War One, it ended war. So when Hitler rises up in Germany, or Mussolini in Italy, or Japan had been building their military, we kind of allowed them to build their military faster than us. We don't want to just jump in and start a war. So one of the big tests of this was Japan in China. Japan invades China, and it's some of the most horrific things that ever happened. The rape of Nanjing, where Japanese soldiers, murdered the men, raped women, and killed children. Just horrific things. And you see this from world perspective, and you say, hey, we got to stop this. This is inhumane. This is not right. But we don't want to get involved, so we let it happen. Okay, they can take part of China. It doesn't affect us, right? And then Japan starts taking other island nations in the Pacific, and it doesn't affect us. We can let them do that. That's appeasement. Germany is the same way with Hitler. When they start taking land in Europe, and want to take parts of France and parts of the UK back, into Germany, where a majority of German people lived that they lost in World War One. Okay, we'll give it back to them so we don't have to fight. And so you're basically just giving power to these fascist leaders, without anything. It's called appeasement. You're kind of appeasing them. Your hope is that they're just going to do what you want, and they're not going to get away. It's like in class, if you have a student that is, talking out, acting out, the teacher might not want to yell at them, right? Not get into a conflict. We don't want this conflict. We'll kind of let it go. Hopefully they just stop, right? Maybe sometimes they do stop, but most times it just continues to escalate, and then it gets to a really bad problem that if you would have stopped at the beginning, wouldn't have been an issue at all. And now it's a really big problem. That's what's going to happen here. We're going to kind of give in and hope they'll just stop and be happy, and instead they keep taking more and more and more and more until it's too late. So, that's where we are at. Obviously, while all this is happening, in Germany, the Holocaust is occurring. Now, the Holocaust, I think sometimes we feel like this kind of jump that the Holocaust is the murder of 6 million Jews, and that's kind of the be all end all of it. But the Holocaust was a process. It was there were multiple steps that Germany went through to ultimately go through this, and the final solution was that mass murder, was that genocide. But it didn't start like that. Things never quite start like that. This was a scapegoat group for the Nazis. That the Jews could be a group that could be scapegoated as a reason for the fall of Germany. And look, it was an easy blame for them, because the government that the Nazis replaced, the Weimar Republic, that was put in place by the Allies after World War One. They associated with the Jews. They associated the financial and banking with the Jews. They tied all these things to the Jewish population, which was not appropriate or right, but so that they had someone to blame when things went wrong. So, the first step was the stripping of Jewish rights in Germany. The Nuremberg laws that were put in place to basically, and this will happen kind of gradually, but to not give Jews the right to hold public office, to not give Jews the right eventually to own private business, and that would be kind of the first step to this. One big event that happens in this process is Kristallnacht. A Nazi officer is killed, and a Jewish group is blamed for that murder. And so, leaders of the Nazi Party actually make public addresses that every Jewish-owned business needs to be destroyed, and that people have the right to go out and do that. And so, Kristallnacht means broken glass, and basically, the supporters of the Nazis go out to the street, go out to the cities. They break all the windows of all of these businesses. They loot and commit violent acts against Jewish business owners. The streets are littered with broken glass from all the windows being shattered. You destroy all the Jewish businesses that existed in major cities in Germany, and then they pass laws to strip the right to even own business and property for that. So that's kind of the first step in the process. Moving forward past that, we're going to see the segregation of Jews into ghettos. Essentially, they would put Jews into into ghettos, and in major cities try to segregate them in this population. So they weren't not allowed to leave, and had to stay in these places. They'd strip them of property and arms and those kind of things. And while all this is going on at the same time too, Germany is deporting a number of Jews, as many as they can. And so a lot of countries, including us and Britain and France and other countries in Eastern Europe, are going to take on many of the Jews that are deported. And Hitler's and the Nazis are going to start with the intellectuals. They're going to start with professors and teachers and scientists, right? So someone like Albert Einstein, for example, is deported from German-held lands to the United States. And as we'll talk about later this week, he's going to be a part of the Manhattan Project that helps build the atomic bomb. So, which had many German Jews working on it. So there was an opportunity there for the Nazis maybe to utilize the people, had there been a better relationship, to actually build the atomic bomb themselves. So you're deporting people, Jews, you're putting them into ghettos, and kind of segregating the population. And ultimately, what we'll see is a step, the final solution is the building of the concentration camps and the mass murder of the Jewish population in German-held land. Now, I go into this because it's really important to know that this happened, this existed, and we know it happened. And it might be something when we get back to school and talk about it a little bit more. There's definitely some more specifics there, but this goes to the appeasement piece with us as well, because we knew something was happening, right? When we're taking on this mass deportation of Jews, when we're taking on seeing from afar what is being blamed, the Kristallnacht issues, that is a big issue. We know something's happening. Maybe we don't know about the final solution. We don't know about the mass murder to the extent that it was, but we knew that Jews were being killed. And we didn't do anything because we don't want to get involved. We're isolationist here. I'll give you one more example of this, and kind of this story is the voyage of the St. Louis. And so the St. Louis was number of Jews in Eastern Europe are going to get out, right? Because they see kind of the writing on the wall that ultimately the Nazis are probably going to kill them, or at least make their lives absolutely miserable. So they're going to try to get into Cuba or the United States. So they take the St. Louis voyage. About 75 to 80% of those on the ship were Jewish. Go to Cuba, and the goal was kind of to land in Cuba, take some time, be able to get papers to get into the United States. And they land in Cuba, and Cuba says, we're going to take, a handful of people, a couple dozen, and everyone else, you got to leave. We're not going to accept you. So what do you do? Well, let's go to Miami. That's the closest U.S. port. Let's go to Miami. Let's try to get in. And so, they come as refugees. This when we hear about immigrants coming in as refugees to the United States, this is what it is. Hey, we're in danger, and we need to get out of where we are. If we can't get in here and can't get in anywhere, then you have to go back, and you're back in danger. And so this is a big immigration question we still have today. What do you do with refugees? Do you help them? Do you not? And if you remember, we talked about the immigration policy of the United States had really harshened, right? We had the quota system where, quotas were set for how many people from each country could come into the United States. And we had already met our quota at this point. So St. Louis comes up to Miami, comes up to Florida, and is, trying to disembark, and said, look, we have our quota. We can't just let you in. We have to call the president, Franklin Roosevelt. So they call Franklin Roosevelt. And Franklin Roosevelt declines the call. He doesn't want to take the call and have to make the decision, because either he's breaking federal law if he accepts these refugees, or he doesn't, and it looks really bad. So instead he does nothing. I'm just not going to take the call. I don't even know about it. And so they're sent back. And, we learned later about 80 to 90% of those on the St. Louis that were Jewish were killed in the Holocaust. So, there was an opportunity for the United States to save people's lives, and they did not take it. So that's the appeasement, that's the isolationist piece, that's the downside of trying to stay out of things, is here's an easy chance. Just let these people in the country, process them as immigrants, and you save their lives. We don't do it. That's the problem here. Now, look, we're going to stake our side in the war very early on. We know which side we're on. Like I said before, we're not on the side of the Nazis. We're not on the side of the fascists. We're not on the side of Japan. We are on the side of, Britain and France and Australia and the other, allied powers that are going to be here. So we passed the Lend-Lease Act, and the Lend-Lease Act is our way of staying out of it, but we'll help you out. And this is enough for American citizens. We say, hey, let's send guns, not soldiers. Let's send guns, not our children, to go fight in this war. So if we help, maybe they can win without us, and we can stay out of it. And so that's what the Lend-Lease Act is. We're gonna give guns. We're gonna give money. We're gonna give supplies. We're gonna give food. We're gonna give whatever we can to the Allied powers so they can win against the Axis, and that's the goal. So that's the Lend-Lease Act. It seems good. It seems like we can stay out of it. Everything's good. Even on the other side, we're even talking to Japan to try to maybe negotiate a peace ahead of time, because Japan's kind of working their way through the Pacific Ocean and trying to take over the Pacific. And look, we're in the Pacific. We're going to be a target unless we can come to some peace agreement. Now, the thinking is either we can get this thing done, or we can actually go and make some type of agreement with them. So that becomes the goal. We know that if this piece doesn't get done, and it doesn't, and it really probably wasn't that close to getting done, they're going to attack us at some point. Do we know when? No. Do we know where? No. And look, when you try to predict these things, you're going to put your best people on it to try to predict, okay, if this country's going to attack us, where's it going to be? And a lot of the thoughts out there was, well, if they're going to attack, it's probably going to be California. We have some naval bases that aren't super secure. They probably could attack with getting in, under, quote unquote, under the radar, which was relatively new at the time, to have a radar and try to piece that together and see when these planes are coming from Japan. Now, we know they don't do that. We know they attacked Pearl Harbor December 7th, 1941. And, a couple pieces to the reasoning for this. One is that, hey, we didn't expect Pearl Harbor to be the point of attack. Two, it happens on a Sunday when, a lot of soldiers are at church or coming back from church. So there is the ships and guns are less manned. So very kind of smart on the Japanese part and how they set this up. And and then the last thing is the radar. Look, the radar wasn't very good yet. And so when things popped up on the radar, a lot of times there's an exercise. Sometimes there's just a big bird, that pops up on the radar as a plane. You don't know. So when, the Japanese do pop up on the radar and it is kind of, hey, something's here. It's probably nothing. Let's not worry about it. And Pearl Harbor happens. So, that obviously that gets us into the war. When Pearl Harbor hits, the nation's going to rally around that. When we are attacked, as we've seen in past wars, as we've seen with the Lusitania in World War One, whether you want to say that we were attacked or we were hit, that was the feeling among Americans. Whether you want to say the Maine blowing up, in around Cuba, so a Spanish-American War. When we feel like we're attacked, in this case in Pearl Harbor, we were definitely attacked. There's no question about it. That's when we're going to get involved. So Pearl Harbor happens, and America's in. We are in the war and going to fight from there. So there you go. There's kind of the entry into World War II. If you have questions, you can put them in the comments in the Google Classroom. I'll be happy to answer those. You can put them in the comments on YouTube if you want to, or email me, shallam@kosd.org. If we get some questions this week, maybe next week I'll make a little Q&A video, just kind of hitting some of the things that, that maybe I forgot, trying to kind of lecture off the top here and do that. So feel free to put in questions. Later this week, I'll have a second lecture about World War II itself, and we'll finish up the course, actually, with this last lecture. So thank you, everyone. Hope you're all doing well, staying safe, being healthy, and we'll see you soon.